5 years after the betrayal, Naomi's company had become one of the fastest-growing logistics businesses in the city. What started as a small delivery service with a single rented van had expanded into warehouses, transportation contracts, and offices across several regions. Newspapers featured her success story. Business magazines called her one of the most inspiring entrepreneurs in the country. Yet despite her achievements, Naomi remained humble. She never spoke publicly about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed her life. Meanwhile, Samuel's life had moved in the opposite direction. The business Naomi had financed with years of hard work abroad collapsed under debt. The friends who once surrounded him disappeared. The woman he had married after betraying Naomi left when the money ran out. The luxurious house he proudly showed off was facing foreclosure. One rainy afternoon, Samuel sat alone in the empty living room staring at unpaid bills scattered across the table. The silence felt heavier than any debt collector's letter. For the first time, he fully understood what he had thrown away. Naomi had never just been a wife. She had been the foundation beneath everything he built. Without her sacrifice, patience, and support, none of his previous success would have existed. Yet by the time he understood that truth, she had already built a completely new life without him. One morning, Samuel received an official notice from the bank. The property he believed belonged to him would soon be repossessed. Desperate and running out of options, he visited several relatives seeking help. Many politely refused. Others reminded him how Naomi had been treated when she returned home years earlier. Everywhere he turned, doors seemed to close. Finally, an old family friend offered him unexpected advice. "Go speak to Naomi," the man said quietly. Samuel immediately shook his head. Shame flooded through him. The idea of facing her seemed impossible. Yet as weeks passed and his situation worsened, he realized he had nowhere else to go. The following Monday, he stood outside Naomi's corporate headquarters. Employees walked confidently through the building while luxury vehicles entered the underground parking area. Samuel felt completely out of place. Security personnel asked his name and reason for visiting. When he explained, they contacted Naomi's office. To his surprise, she agreed to meet him. Sitting in the reception area, Samuel waited nervously. Every minute felt longer than the last. Years earlier, Naomi had stood helplessly watching him choose someone else. Today their positions were reversed. The woman he once underestimated now controlled opportunities he could only dream of. When Naomi entered the meeting room, Samuel barely recognized her. She carried herself with quiet confidence. There was no bitterness in her expression, no anger, no desire for revenge. Only strength. For several moments neither spoke. Finally Samuel lowered his eyes and apologized. Not the short, convenient apology people offer when caught making mistakes. This apology came from years of regret. He admitted everything. The lies. The betrayal. The selfish decisions. The humiliation he caused. Naomi listened without interruption. When he finished, silence filled the room. Samuel expected criticism. He expected rejection. Instead, Naomi simply nodded. "I forgave you a long time ago," she said calmly. The statement stunned him. "Then why didn't you come back?" he asked quietly. Naomi looked directly at him. "Because forgiveness and trust are not the same thing." Samuel had no response. Deep down, he knew she was right. Some bridges can be repaired. Others can only teach lessons. Naomi explained that rebuilding her life had required years of sacrifice and determination. Returning to the past would mean abandoning everything she learned. She wished him peace but made it clear she would never return as his wife. For the first time, Samuel understood that true consequences are not always loud or dramatic. Sometimes the greatest punishment is watching someone you hurt succeed without you. Several months later, Naomi launched a charitable foundation supporting women who worked abroad to support their families. Thousands attended the opening ceremony. Government officials, business leaders, and community members praised her efforts. During her speech, Naomi shared lessons from her journey without revealing personal details. She spoke about resilience, dignity, and self-worth. She reminded women that sacrifice should never require losing themselves. Among the crowd stood Samuel. He listened quietly from the back row. Nobody paid attention to him. The spotlight belonged entirely to Naomi. Watching her speak, he felt a mixture of pride and sadness. Pride because she had become extraordinary. Sadness because he remembered a time when she would have shared every success with him. After the ceremony ended, Naomi noticed him standing alone. Their eyes met briefly across the crowd. She smiled kindly before continuing toward waiting reporters. It was a small gesture, but Samuel understood its meaning. She carried no hatred. Yet her life no longer required his presence. That realization hurt more than any angry confrontation ever could. Years later, Naomi stood on the balcony of her luxury penthouse overlooking the city she once struggled to survive in. Below her, millions of lights stretched toward the horizon. The journey had been painful. She had left home with hope, sacrificed everything for her family, endured betrayal, rebuilt from nothing, and eventually created a life beyond her imagination. Across town, Samuel lived a much simpler life. He worked honestly, paid his debts, and carried the lessons of his past with humility. Although they never reunited romantically, both eventually found peace. Naomi's story became famous not because she became wealthy, but because she refused to let betrayal define her future. She transformed pain into purpose and loss into strength. And whenever people asked how she survived everything that happened, her answer remained simple: the moment I stopped building my future around someone else's choices, I finally started building my own. The city lights sparkled beneath the night sky as Naomi smiled quietly. She no longer needed revenge. Success, peace, and self-respect had already given her everything she once thought she lost. And that was the greatest victory of all. The first year abroad felt like an endless test of endurance. Naomi worked 12-hour shifts at a private hospital in Dubai, often volunteering for extra hours whenever overtime was available. While other nurses spent weekends exploring the city, Naomi stayed in her tiny apartment calculating exchange rates and planning how much money she could send home. Every paycheck had a purpose. School fees for her younger siblings. Rent for the family house. Capital for Samuel's dream business. Every sacrifice felt worthwhile because she believed they were building a future together. Each night she called Samuel before sleeping. He would answer with stories about the business, promises about the future, and reminders that he missed her. Those conversations became Naomi's emotional fuel. Whenever exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, she imagined the home they would eventually share. She imagined returning to a successful husband, a stable family, and a life they built together through mutual sacrifice. But slowly, almost invisibly, small changes began appearing. Samuel sometimes missed calls. Messages took longer to answer. His voice carried less excitement than before. Naomi noticed the difference but convinced herself it was temporary. Distance created challenges for every relationship. She trusted him completely. What she didn't know was that trust was already being tested by choices happening thousands of miles away. Back home, Samuel's small electronics business began growing rapidly. The store Naomi helped finance moved from a rented kiosk into a proper commercial space. Customers increased. Profits improved. Family members praised Samuel for his success. Yet very few people acknowledged where the startup capital came from. Whenever relatives congratulated him, Samuel smiled proudly and accepted the praise without mentioning the woman working overseas to make it possible. Over time, the attention changed him. He started enjoying admiration. He enjoyed being viewed as a self-made businessman. New friends entered his life. Many were successful entrepreneurs who spent evenings at restaurants, lounges, and networking events. Samoa began spending more time with them and less time thinking about Naomi's sacrifices. One evening he met Vanessa, a fashionable business consultant who frequently visited his store. Their conversation started professionally. Then they became personal. Vanessa admired Samoa's ambition. Samoa enjoyed her attention. Neither relationship crossed obvious boundaries at first, but emotional distance often begins long before physical betrayal. While Naomi worked double shifts to secure their future, Samoa was becoming increasingly comfortable with a present that no longer seemed to include her. During the second year abroad, Naomi noticed something unusual. Every conversation seemed shorter. Samoa no longer talked about their future as often. When she asked about marriage plans or property investments, he quickly changed the subject. Yet he never stopped requesting financial help. There was always another opportunity. Another investment. Another emergency expense. Because Naomi loved him, she continued sending money. She trusted that everything remained part of the larger dream they shared. One evening after finishing a particularly exhausting shift, Naomi called unexpectedly. The phone rang several times before Samoa answered. His voice sounded nervous. Strange background noises filled the call. Naomi asked where he was. Samoa immediately claimed he was attending a business meeting. The explanation sounded reasonable, but something felt wrong. For the first time since leaving home, Naomi ended a conversation with doubt in her heart. She spent hours staring at the ceiling that night, replaying every word. Deep inside, a small warning voice tried to get her attention. But love has a way of silencing warnings when people aren't ready to hear them. The third year brought bigger changes. Samoa purchased a luxury SUV. He moved into a larger home. His social media accounts filled with photos showing an increasingly glamorous lifestyle. Friends admired his apparent success. Naomi felt proud whenever she saw the post. She believed their sacrifices were finally paying off. What she couldn't see were the details hidden outside the camera frame. Vanessa appeared more frequently in Samoa's daily life. Business meetings became dinners. Dinners became regular outings. Rumors started circulating among people who knew them both. A few relatives noticed the growing closeness. Some felt uncomfortable. Others remained silent because confronting the truth would create conflict. Meanwhile, Naomi remained focused on work. She skipped holidays. She missed birthdays. She postponed vacations. Every decision revolved around supporting the future she believed she was building. One afternoon a coworker asked her why she worked so hard. Naomi smiled and showed a photo of Samoa on her phone. Because we're building something together, she said proudly. Thousands of miles away, Samoa was slowly building something else entirely. Near the end of the fourth year, Naomi received shocking news. Her work contract had been extended, giving her the opportunity to earn significantly more money. The decision was difficult. Remaining abroad meant more years apart. Returning home meant abandoning a major financial opportunity. Samoa encouraged her to stay. He insisted the extra income would help secure their future. Naomi agreed, believing they were making the decision together. But after the call ended, Samoa celebrated privately. Every additional year Naomi stayed abroad made it easier to continue living a double life. Over the following months, his relationship with Vanessa became public among close friends. Some warned him that the truth would eventually emerge. Samoa dismissed their concerns. He convinced himself he could manage both worlds indefinitely. Yet secrets have a way of growing heavier over time. The larger the lie became, the harder it was to control. While Samoa enjoyed the illusion of success, Naomi continued sacrificing everything for a future that was already beginning to disappear. Neither realized that a single unexpected decision would soon bring their worlds crashing together. After nearly 5 years abroad, Naomi made a decision she hadn't told anyone about. She booked a flight home. No warning. No announcement. No phone call. She wanted to surprise Samuel. For months she had imagined the moment. She pictured him waiting at the airport with flowers. She imagined the look on his face when he realized the years of separation were finally over. During the long flight, Naomi smiled every time she thought about it. In her handbag she carried a small velvet box containing an expensive watch she had purchased for Samuel using her savings. It was her way of thanking him for waiting. When the plane landed, her heart raced with excitement. She collected her luggage and stepped into the arrival terminal expecting to see him. But he wasn't there. Naomi checked her phone repeatedly. No messages. No missed calls. Assuming there had been a misunderstanding, she hired a taxi and headed toward the city. As they drove through familiar streets, she noticed how much had changed. New buildings stood where empty lots once existed. Businesses had grown. Roads had improved. Yet one thing remained the same. Naomi still believed she was coming home to the man she loved. Halfway through the journey, she called Samuel. The phone rang unanswered. She tried again. Nothing. A third attempt went directly to voicemail. A strange feeling settled in her chest. It wasn't fear exactly. More like the sense that something important was happening just beyond her understanding. The taxi eventually turned into the upscale neighborhood Samuel now lived in. Naomi stared at the beautiful houses with pride. In her mind, every brick represented years of sacrifice. Every success represented a dream they built together. She had no idea that within the next hour, her entire world would collapse. The taxi stopped in front of a large modern house. Naomi smiled as she stepped out. This was bigger than anything she expected. She imagined Samuel proudly showing her around. Carrying her suitcase, she walked toward the front door. Then she froze. Parked in the driveway was a luxury SUV she had never seen before. Women's shoes sat neatly beside the entrance. Confusion replaced excitement. Maybe a relative was visiting. Maybe Samuel had guessed. She rang the doorbell. Moments later the door opened. A young woman stood there. Beautiful. Confident. Completely comfortable inside the house. For several seconds neither spoke. Naomi politely smiled. Hello. Is Samuel home? The woman's expression changed instantly. Confusion. Then concern. Then something close to panic. Before she could answer, footsteps approached from inside. Samuel appeared. The moment he saw Naomi, all color disappeared from his face. The suitcase slipped from her hand. Silence filled the doorway. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Samuel looked like a man staring at a ghost. Naomi looked from him to the woman beside him and back again. Her heart already understood what her mind was still trying to reject. Who is she? Naomi asked quietly. Samuel opened his mouth but no words came out. Then the woman spoke. I'm Vanessa. Another pause. His wife. The world seemed to stop. Naomi didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply stood there unable to process what she had just heard. 5 years of sacrifice. 5 years of trust. 5 years of believing in a future together. Destroyed by a single sentence. What happened next became one of the most painful moments of Naomi's life. Samuel invited her inside, desperately trying to explain. Vanessa sat silently while he stumbled through half-truths and excuses. He claimed he never intended for things to happen this way. He said loneliness changed him. He insisted he still cared about Naomi. Every explanation sounded smaller than the betrayal itself. Then Naomi noticed framed photographs displayed throughout the house. Wedding pictures. Vacation pictures. Family celebrations. Evidence of a life Samuel had built while she worked endless shifts overseas. Worse still, she recognized items she had paid for. The furniture. The appliances. The decorations. Her money was everywhere. She felt as though she had financed her own replacement. Then another devastating truth emerged. The house itself had been purchased using funds Naomi sent home over several years. Yet the property documents listed Vanessa as co-owner. Naomi listened quietly as Samoa tried to justify everything. Eventually she raised one hand. The room fell silent. "Stop," she said softly. Samoa stopped speaking immediately. Naomi looked around the house one final time. Every wall seemed to tell the story of her betrayal. Then she picked up her suitcase. "I hope she's worth everything you lost," she said calmly. Without another word, she walked out. Samoa called after her. She never looked back. Some heartbreak arrives with tears. Others arrive with silence. This was the second kind. That night Naomi checked into a small hotel near the city center. For hours she sat alone staring at the skyline through the window. Her phone rang constantly. Samoa called again and again. She ignored every attempt. Around midnight, messages from relatives began arriving. Some apologized. Others claimed they didn't know the full truth. A few admitted they had known about Vanessa for years but stayed silent. That realization hurt almost as much as the betrayal itself. The people she trusted most had watched it happen. They knew she was sending money every month. They knew she was sacrificing her youth abroad. Yet nobody warned her. By sunrise Naomi had cried more tears than she thought possible. Then something changed. The tears stopped. A quiet determination replaced them. She realized she had two choices. She could spend years mourning the life she lost. Or she could build a new one. The decision wasn't dramatic. It happened silently while watching the sunrise over the city. At that moment Naomi promised herself one thing. She would never again depend on someone else's loyalty for her future. Whatever came next would belong entirely to her. The following week Naomi withdrew what remained of her savings and rented a tiny office above an aging commercial building. Friends questioned her decision. Family members encouraged her to return abroad. Even former co-workers thought she was making a mistake. But Naomi had already made up her mind. Every painful experience had taught her something valuable. She understood logistics. She understood international shipping. She understood discipline. Most importantly, she understood survival. Using those skills, she launched a small delivery company. The first months were brutal. She worked longer hours than ever before. Sometimes she personally loaded vehicles. Sometimes she handled customer service calls herself. But unlike before, every sacrifice now belonged to her own future. Across town, Samoa continued living comfortably, believing Naomi would eventually forgive him. He had no idea she was quietly rebuilding her life. Nor did he realize that the woman he betrayed was about to become far more successful than he ever imagined. The next chapter wouldn't be about heartbreak. It would be about transformation. And karma was already beginning to move. The first 2 years of Naomi's business were the hardest years of her life. Every morning she arrived before sunrise and often left long after dark. Her tiny office had peeling paint, unreliable electricity, and furniture bought second-hand from a clothing company. Yet Naomi treated every customer like they were her most important client. She remembered how it felt to be ignored, underestimated, and dismissed. Because of that, she built her company differently. Every package arrived on time. Every complaint received attention. Every promise was honored. Slowly, customers began recommending her services. Small contracts became larger ones. Larger contracts became corporate partnerships. By the end of the second year, Naomi had expanded from 1 delivery van to 6 vehicles. She hired employees who needed opportunities just as desperately as she once had. For the first time since returning home, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: pride. Not because she was making money, but because every achievement belonged entirely to her. No lies. No betrayal. No dependence on anyone else's decisions. Meanwhile, Samuel barely noticed her progress. He was too busy enjoying the lifestyle built during easier times. Whenever mutual friends mentioned Naomi's company, he dismissed it as a temporary project. In his mind, she would eventually return abroad or move on to something else. He never imagined that the woman he betrayed was quietly building an empire. 3 years later, Naomi received an opportunity that changed everything. A major international retailer was searching for a logistics partner capable of managing deliveries across multiple regions. Larger companies competed aggressively for the contract. Naomi's business was considered too small to win. Yet she refused to back down. For weeks she prepared presentations, studied supply chain reports, and met potential partners. The process demanded every skill she had learned during her years abroad. When the final decision arrived, industry experts were shocked. Naomi's company won the contract. Overnight her business entered a completely different level. Revenue doubled within months. New offices opened. Investors started paying attention. Business magazines requested interviews. Newspapers published articles about the former overseas worker who transformed herself into a successful entrepreneur. Naomi remained focused despite the attention. She remembered the lonely nights abroad. She remembered standing at Samuel's doorway. She remembered the hotel room where she promised herself a new future. Those memories kept her grounded. Success was exciting, but she knew how quickly life could change. Across town, Samuel read one of the newspaper articles while drinking coffee. The headline featured Naomi's smiling face on the front page. For the first time, he felt something uncomfortable. Regret was beginning to replace confidence. While Naomi's company expanded, Samuel's world began developing cracks. His business depended heavily on borrowed money and risky investments. During prosperous years, those decisions seemed smart. Now they were becoming dangerous. Sales started declining. Competition increased. Expenses continued rising. Vanessa encouraged him to maintain appearances, insisting that success required looking successful. Expensive dinners continued. Luxury purchases continued. Social events continued. Debt continued growing. Samuel ignored warning signs for months. Then one major investment failed completely. Within weeks, financial pressure became impossible to hide. Creditors called constantly. Suppliers demanded payments. Employees grew worried about delayed salaries. For the first time in years, Samuel felt genuine fear. The same fear Naomi had experienced alone while building her company from nothing. One evening he sat inside his office reviewing financial statements. The numbers were devastating. Everything he spent years building was beginning to collapse. As he stared at the documents, a painful realization surfaced. The most stable period of his life had been when Naomi was beside him. Not because she brought money alone. Because she brought discipline, sacrifice, and accountability. The qualities he once took for granted were now the qualities he missed most. The following year Naomi received an invitation to speak at a prestigious business leadership conference. Hundreds of entrepreneurs, investors, and government officials attended the event. When she walked onto the stage, the audience rose in applause. Her story had become a symbol of resilience across the country. During her speech, Naomi spoke about failure, perseverance, and rebuilding after disappointment. She never mentioned Samuel by name. She never described the betrayal. Instead, she focused on lessons. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the reason your life improves, she told the audience. The statement received a standing ovation. Among the attendees sat Samuel. He had come as part of a struggling business delegation. Watching Naomi command the stage felt surreal. Years earlier she waited for his phone calls from a tiny apartment overseas. Now industry leaders waited for her advice. As applause filled the conference hall, Samoa lowered his eyes. He finally understood something painful. Naomi's success wasn't luck. It wasn't revenge. It was the result of years of discipline and sacrifice. The same qualities he failed to appreciate when he had them close. A few months after the conference, disaster struck Samoa completely. His company entered financial crisis. Investors withdrew support. Creditors filed legal actions. The luxury lifestyle disappeared almost overnight. Vanessa, unwilling to endure the struggle, eventually left. The house became quieter than Samoa ever imagined possible. One rainy evening he sat alone in the same living room where Naomi had once stood with her suitcase. The memory returned with painful clarity. For years he believed he had chosen the better future. Now he understood he had traded loyalty for temporary comfort. As rain struck the windows, Samoa stared at a business magazine featuring Naomi on the cover. The headline called her one of the country's most influential entrepreneurs. At that moment, he made a decision. Pride had cost him enough already. He would find Naomi and apologize, not to regain her, but because she deserved the truth. He didn't know whether she would listen. He didn't know whether forgiveness was possible. But for the first time in years, he was ready to face the consequences of his choices. And Naomi's biggest test was about to begin. The morning Samoa finally decided to visit Naomi's headquarters felt heavier than any day he could remember. He stood outside the towering glass building carrying nothing except a folder of financial documents and years of regret. Employees moved confidently through the entrance, greeting one another as they began another productive day. Nobody recognized the man standing nervously near the doors. Years earlier, Samoa had been proud, successful, admired. Today he felt like a stranger in a world Naomi had built without him. After several minutes, he gathered enough courage to enter. The receptionist politely asked his name. When he explained who he was, a brief look of recognition crossed her face before she contacted Naomi's office. Samoa expected rejection. Instead, he was told to wait. As he sat in the elegant reception area, he noticed framed photographs celebrating company milestones. New offices. Employee achievements. Community projects. Every image reminded him how much Naomi had accomplished after walking away from his life. An hour later, a secretary appeared and led him toward the executive floor. Each step felt heavier than the last. Samoa wasn't coming to ask for money. He wasn't coming to save his business. He had finally accepted that some losses cannot be reversed. He came because carrying guilt had become harder than facing the truth. When the conference room door opened, Naomi stood beside the window overlooking the city. Calm. Confident. Successful. Everything he once failed to appreciate. For a moment, neither spoke. Years of history filled the silence between them. Samoa slowly took a seat across from Naomi. His prepared speech disappeared the moment he looked into her eyes. There was no anger there. No resentment. Just peace. Somehow that made the conversation even harder. For several seconds he struggled to find words. Finally he lowered his head and spoke honestly. He admitted every mistake. The lies. The selfishness. The betrayal. The humiliation. He described how pride convinced him he could replace loyalty with convenience. He explained how success had blinded him and how failure had forced him to confront who he really became. Naomi listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't defend herself. She didn't accuse him. When Samoa finally finished, tears filled his eyes. I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me, he whispered. The room fell silent. Naomi slowly nodded. Yes, she said gently. The answer wasn't cruel. It was simply true. Samoa looked away. Deep down, he had hoped for some sign that the past could be repaired. Instead, he found something more honest. Reality. Naomi explained that rebuilding her life had taken years of sacrifice. Every success represented a choice to move forward rather than remain trapped in heartbreak. Returning to the past would mean abandoning everything she learned. Samoa understood. The realization hurt, but it also brought clarity. Some lessons arrive too late to change the outcome. Their purpose is not to restore what was lost but to ensure the mistake is never repeated. Before leaving, Samoa handed Naomi the folder he carried. Inside were property records, financial statements, and legal documents connected to investments she had originally funded years earlier. Naomi reviewed them carefully. To her surprise, several assets still legally traced back to money she had transferred while working abroad. Samoa explained that recent legal reviews uncovered irregularities in ownership structures. In practical terms, some properties he claimed as his own were partially financed by Naomi's documented contributions. He pushed the folder toward her. "They're yours," he said quietly. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she closed the folder. "Keep them." Samoa stared in disbelief. The assets were valuable. Enough to significantly strengthen her already successful portfolio. Yet Naomi shook her head. "I already received what I needed." Samoa didn't understand. Naomi smiled softly. "I got my life back." For years she dreamed of justice. She imagined confronting him. Imagined proving her worth. But standing there now, she realized she no longer needed any of it. The success she built, the peace she found, and the confidence she earned meant more than property ever could. Samoa lowered his eyes again. For the second time that day, he realized Naomi possessed something far more valuable than wealth. Freedom. Months later, Naomi launched a national foundation supporting overseas workers and families affected by financial exploitation. The organization provided legal assistance, financial education, and emergency support for people facing situations similar to her own. The initiative received widespread attention. Thousands attended the launch ceremony. Government officials praised her efforts. International organizations offered partnerships. During her keynote speech, Naomi spoke about resilience. She explained that betrayal can destroy confidence if people allow it, but it can also become the starting point of something extraordinary. The audience responded with thunderous applause. Standing quietly among the crowd was Samuel. Unlike previous years, he felt no jealousy. No bitterness. Only admiration. Watching Naomi transform pain into purpose inspired him to rebuild his own life differently. For the first time in years, he stopped viewing himself as a victim of consequences and accepted responsibility for creating them. As the ceremony ended, Naomi noticed him in the crowd. Their eyes met briefly. She smiled politely before greeting other guests. The gesture was small, but Samoa understood its meaning. She had forgiven him completely. Yet forgiveness did not require a second chance. Sometimes forgiveness simply means choosing not to carry hatred anymore. 10 years after returning home, Naomi stood on the balcony of her luxury penthouse overlooking a city that once witnessed her heartbreak. The skyline glowed beneath the evening sky while distant traffic lights stretched toward the horizon. Her company employed hundreds of people. Her foundation helped thousands more. Most importantly, she had found peace. Not because life became perfect, but because she stopped measuring her worth through someone else's choices. Across the city, Samoa lived a quieter life. He worked honestly, rebuilt his reputation, and carried the lesson of his past with humility. They never reunited romantically. They never returned to what once existed. Some chapters are meant to end. Yet both eventually found something better than revenge. They found understanding. As Naomi watched the city lights below, she remembered the frightened woman who once sat alone in a hotel room after discovering the betrayal. If she could speak to that version of herself now, she would say one thing: the ending you fear is often the beginning you need. A gentle smile crossed her face. The pain was gone. The anger was gone. Only gratitude remained. Because the greatest comeback wasn't becoming wealthy. It wasn't becoming successful. It was becoming someone betrayal could no longer break. And that was a victory nobody could ever take away.